Yeah, my story and how I became involved in this issue is rather complex and goes back over 40 years. My uncle was the senior project engineer that designed the lunar module, which was the thing that landed on the moon with Neil Armstrong in it in 1969. And I was a young boy when he was working on that and had an interest in space and all of that because of family. But also around that time, when I was about 8 or 9, I saw a beautiful, seamless disc, round-shaped craft in daylight in the afternoon with some boys in the neighborhood where I grew up in North Carolina, in Charlotte. And there was a Douglas missile plant there at the time, and I think that perhaps they were investigating this missile plant. But we saw it and then it just vanished. It didn't float away, but it was hovering silently. And I became extremely interested that I had seen something from another world. And so I began to look into this matter a great deal. And as time went on, I really got involved very heavily and had a number of experiences with these ET spacecraft and the beings on board them over when I was a young man, late teenager. But in 1990, started an organization known as the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is CSETI for short, CSETI. And it's a nonprofit, and its main prime purpose is to create groups of people to go out to areas like you have in Norway, where these objects have been seen, and not just observe them, but to interact, to signal to them, and to interact with the intelligence behind the spacecraft. So that we began to do in 1990. And of course, we immediately began to have amazing successes. We went down to near Opan, Belgium, near the German border. We had a massive triangular craft that came right over us, vibrating with the tones we were sending up. We went to Florida, near Pensacola, and did an experiment on the beach there by the Gulf of Mexico, and had 4 of these objects appear, signaling to us with lights back and forth for about 20 minutes. It was on the front page of the paper the next day, and it was witnessed by 40 or 50 people, 2 of whom were Air Force pilots. And we then went to Mexico near the volcano Popo, the large volcano, and we had an incredible encounter with a massive ship that was about 800 feet on each side of a triangle, almost 3 football fields on each side. And it came over and hovered over us and turned and was signaling with us while we were contacting the pilot on board. And these began to happen more and more. And so by 1993, our group concluded that not only was it possible for humans to make peaceful diplomatic contact with these visitors, but that it was very important that the world know this. So we started a project that's known as the Disclosure Project, which people can see at DisclosureProject.org, where we began to identify military and corporate and CIA intelligence officers who had personal knowledge of the classified operations dealing with this subject, and to get them to come forward with our information to disclose this publicly. And that Disclosure Project really began in 1993. And around that time, of course, I was asked to brief President Clinton's team and his first CIA director, R. James Woolsey. So between 1993 and the year 2000, we spent a great deal of time not only putting together the evidence and the proof, which is available at DisclosureProject.org, but meeting with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee in the United States, meeting with former ministers of defense in Great Britain, people who were in the White House staff, and of course very high officials at the Pentagon, including the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, to name a few. And also at this time, the UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali, his family were very interested in this, and his wife Leah Ghali became very interested, and we met with her and gave briefing materials for them. So it was a public education effort, because what we felt was necessary was that the secrecy should be ended and this information disclosed so that humanity, not just one country, in America, but all of humanity could make peaceful contact with these civilizations visiting us, but also would lay the foundation for these new technologies, the energy and propulsion systems that are behind these UFOs that are so mysterious. How are they flying? Well, this is understood, but they are in classified projects. So that was another objective, was to get the technologies out to the public so we could have a civilization that would get freed from the use of oil and the destruction of the environment. This is a very good question. How do you get all these sort of people to come forward on a subject that is the object of so much social opprobrium, ridicule, and threats? I mean, people's lives have been taken to keep this secret. I remind people that the 1951 Canadian top secret memo written by Wilbur Smith stated very directly that not only were these flying saucers, as they were called back then, real, but that it was the most classified secret in the United States, exceeding the secrecy of the development of the hydrogen bomb in the 1950s. So it's very, very, very secret. And the way that we approached this was to first articulate a vision. What good would come from disclosing this? Okay? Well, first of all, it would put the legal constitutional governments of the world back in control, because they're not in control now. President Clinton had no control over this matter. People close to President Kennedy and President Carter have told me they had no control over the management of this issue. It was taken out of their hands and has been illegally, by rogue elements within the corporate, aerospace, military intelligence community, been run under the radar screen, secretly. So that would be a very important outcome, because it would put the rule of law and civilization back in control of a very important issue. But also, I think that the way we got people to come forward was that we didn't say, come forward just with one person. We waited until we had hundreds. And when we first came forward in 2001 at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and this was broadcast all over the world, we had at that time over 110 of these military and intelligence officers who had been filmed, and there were about 22 of them at the press conference. But we put out transcripts of testimony of dozens and dozens of these men, and they came out together. And so in a large number, there's security and there's credibility. Because if only one person who's a radar operator for the Strategic Air Command says he saw something, well, you can say, oh, he saw nothing, he was imagining, he's lying. If you have 12 credentialed people with top secret clearances who said that they have tracked these on radar and have seen how it's been kept secret, then that becomes dispositive. That becomes the proof. So we wanted to have that critical mass, and it also gave these men and a few women the sense that it would be done seriously and that they would have the support of their colleagues. And so before we ever came public, we got them all together as a group, you see, and many of them. And so this encouraged them to come forward, and that's what we continue to do. Many people ask the question, how have we been able to reach all the officials in government? I think a couple of things. One is, as I mentioned, the vision behind what we're doing. People who are in the know. I don't mean in the UFO community, but I mean in senior ranks of government, not just in the United States, but in Europe and around the world, know that we've actually made contact. And this gets a great deal of attention to these high officials. Secondly, they know that we're doing this in a very truthful way, in a very direct way, with serious purpose. So they know that we're not going to waste their time. And thirdly, we have relied on networking. I tell people I was just a country doctor in North Carolina when I started this. You know, I was working in an emergency department. My background is emergency trauma medicine. And when I had the idea to do this, it was very much an idea. I did not have the network. But over a period of years, we made this network, and people who did know senior officials at the Pentagon and senior people in the government and in the Congress came to me. I didn't find them. They found me and said, look, I think this is very important. I can set up a meeting with Senator Bryan, who at the time was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, or the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So it all unfolded very organically, like a flower. And it's really been quite an adventure. But it wasn't because I had any family connections to these people. It was all through networking. And I think the power of the message is that it's really time for this secrecy to end, and for us to make peaceful contact with these visitors, and for the technologies that are behind these objects to be the new energy source to run the planet, so that there's sustainability, the end of poverty, the end of pollution, and the end of the environmental crisis. This is a very big issue. Of course, on the other side is people who do not want that to happen, and they are very powerful. And I have met with them as well, many of them. And some of them support what we are doing and some don't. And I think in the early days, I'm talking the 1930s, 1940s, they didn't really know what they were dealing with. They also did not understand the technologies. And I think that they also didn't know why these visitors were here. For example, the big increase in all the sightings around the world happened at the time when we began to detonate nuclear weapons. This is not an accident. And I've been told by senior intelligence officials that essentially a big red flag went up over our planet saying we were in trouble. But not only are we in trouble, but we could be a threat to others, because you combine going into space, the early stages of space travel, and the use of hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons, and a civilization on Earth that was still very violent, as you look around the Earth even today, of course. So this is something that any enlightened or even self-interested civilization observing the Earth, which I think we've been under observation for thousands of years, would be greatly concerned. But our military and government were completely shocked by this and didn't know what to do with it. I think that's the early, but later, I understand, of course, President Eisenhower wanted to make an announcement about this after he had a meeting near Edwards Air Force Base in 1954. But he was prevented from doing so by what he later called the military-industrial complex, because the interests for secrecy really fall into three broad areas. One is the inertia of the secrecy. Once you start something secret and you have made so many lies and frankly killed so many people and threatened so many people, and you've lied to Congress and you've lied to presidents, how do you bring this out? They painted themselves into a black box, black corner. The other, so that's the inertia. The other is that there were orthodox religious interests that did not know what to make of this. And I've had discussions with senior levels at the Vatican to discuss this. And today, most mainstream religious groups would say, well, there's one supreme being in the universe, and there are many children of God, and we're all children of God. This is what Monsignor Balducci said when we interviewed him at the Vatican. But the Orthodox and fundamentalists would view this in a very disturbing way, because it would upset their worldview. And I think then the biggest became the technological and scientific end of this. Once we retrieved, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, several of these extraterrestrial vehicles, and began to study them, we combined that knowledge with knowledge we already had. Because remember, we had some people like T. Townsend Brown and the B-Field-Brown effect who were studying anti-gravity quite independent of this issue back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. But when their information got combined with studying these spacecraft, they figured out, this is how they're working. And they realized it's the end of oil. It's the end of the need for coal. It's the end of the combustion.